Hello everyone, I'm Leslie Cornwell, Certified Nurse Midwife with Empowering Midwifery Education. This next section has to do with types of business entities. A legal disclaimer we put at the beginning of all of our presentation. This information is for general and educational use only, not intended to substitute for professional, legal, or clinical advice. We strive to keep our information as accurate and timely as possible, but make no promises or guarantees that it'll fit your unique situation and needs. The course objectives, the students will be able to verbalize exactly what is a business entity, why they're important, what are the different types of business entities, and then the pros and cons of each one. So the importance of business entities is really being able to understand if you're thinking of opening a business in your community, you really have to understand what are the different types of business entities out there. There are sole proprietorships, there are limited liability companies, there's corporations, there's S corporations, C corporations, there's for-profit, there's non-profit. So you really have to understand if you're going to start selling services, products, anything to the community, you really have to understand which type of business entity you want to start. So it's a great way for us to understand the tax reasonings, the structure, the pros and cons, short-term, long-term of each of these. And a lot has to do with taxes and vicarious liability and the way you're structured under the tax coding. So let's go to the basics. What is a business entity? A business entity is how your business runs, how you are being taxed, how you're being structured. A sole proprietor is doing business under your social security number. It's super simple. It's your own tax form. You are the business. And that's where a lot of midwives will start, but I try to challenge midwives not to start that way because there's no protection from you in the business, and you're actually paying a lot more in taxes being a sole proprietorship versus just transitioning right away to a limited liability company. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So a business entity is an organization of you, a group of people doing specific business activities under a trade, under a service line, under a business entity to the public. And each one has different taxation subjects. So sole proprietor is the simplest. It doesn't have to be filed with the state. You just do it under your own personal tax returns. It's your social security number. I don't encourage it for midwives. It works great if you're doing Etsy. It works great if you're doing some simple thing that's low risk, small scale, side hobby income stream. There's no vicarious liability protection. There's a lot of tax savings that you're losing when you start a midwifery practice. Most states, it's pretty affordable to start a limited liability company, and I strongly encourage midwives from day one to switch over to that option. So the pros and cons, it's obviously super easy to get started. If someone is hesitant, they don't know the business name, they want to just represent themselves, they do a few clients a year, they want to stay very small scale, I think that could be the rare situation, but it's definitely not the one that I encourage long-term as you grow your business entity. So being the only owner, you're completely responsible for everything. Lawsuits, debt, liability, you get all the profits, you get all the risk. There's no separation of you and the business. So it's very difficult to get a business loan to raise funding. You can't get a business credit line because you are the business. There's no separation between you and the business entity. So one of the great options, if you're considering a not-for-profit, you want to be able to support your community, get tapped into grants and foundations, you want your mission to mostly be giving back to the community. This is a lot of larger scale healthcare facilities, universities, hospitals, charities, foundations, federally qualified health centers, anything having to do with a good chunk of your mission is giving back to the community. You get a lot of tax exemptions when you do this direction. You got a lot of perks, but you also have a board of directors making decisions versus you are the ultimate owner. You could start a nonprofit and your board could eventually fire you and transition and do what the majority want to do. So it's all a matter of your goals and what you want to accomplish short-term, long-term. I challenge a lot of midwives to start a for-profit corporation. And then once you get enough funding and excess cash flow, a non-for-profit, a foundation, is a great way for you to filter some of those profits, do some tax savings with your other business, and then be able to start it. When you start a not-for-profit first, you're very dependent on the grants and the foundation funding, versus you could be with your other business entities that foundational support to the nonprofit. So there's pros and cons of all the different ways to start things. It really just depends on if you want to be able to start this entity for profit, serving the community. You're the sole owner. You are the one that makes the decisions. You're the one that determines the fee schedule, the mission, the vision, what projects you're going to work on, versus a nonprofit is run by a community. It's run by a board. It's a more team approach decision making. So even though something is for profit, I mean, a nonprofit still wants to make money because they've got to be sustainable long term, but a for-profit's primary goal is to create value for a community, make money for the business owner/owners. It's got a little more flexibility where you can have family and friends be investors, be part of the partnership. A nonprofit, they can donate more to and get tax exemptions. So there's really pros and cons to both directions. You just have to determine what type of mission, vision, what type of practice you want to have, short-term, long-term. So there's different types of for-profit corporations. There's the limited liability, there's the C corporation, there's S corporation, and they all have their pros and cons. So anytime you're doing a for-profit, there's taxes. You get more tax deductions. You don't get to do grants. You don't get to do a lot of the exemptions. You don't get perks for your people that donate. You have pros and cons. You get more decision making, but you've also got some tax deductions that you wouldn't be able to do with a nonprofit. You really have to determine, especially when you're doing an S corporation, C corporation, there's dividends, there's shareholders, there's additional complexity to it. So this is the next stage. This is the one I traditionally recommend to midwives to start, a limited liability company from day one, because it has a little bit of a vicarious liability, meaning that you can separate from you and your business a bit more. You get a credit card, you get a bank account, you separate you and your business as much as possible, because it doesn't do any good to start a business if you're going to commingle funds all the time, especially in OB. You don't want your personal assets at risk for your business long term. It is harder when you are solo and you're the business owner, because they can sue you and your company, but our whole stress is we want to get you in stages. We want to reduce the risk as much as possible. So a limited liability company is a great way to do that. You're going to get a tax ID number, an EIN with a federal level. So you're going to separate yourself from your business. It's still simple tax filing. You can put a tax form with your LLC under your personal taxes. You don't have to have a totally separate tax filing like you do for a C Corp and an S Corporation, which will keep your accounting costs down and complexity. But it's got additional tax deductions and things that you can utilize in an LLC that you wouldn't be able to with a sole proprietorship. So the pros and cons, as best as your ability, it just depends on the situation. You can separate a bit more the personal risk to your business versus sole proprietorship. It just depends on what you're being sued for and what the issue is, because with OB care and maternity care services, if it's directly something you did and you're the owner, they could theoretically sue you and the business, versus it's the team, it's the business, the building had an issue. It just depends on what the reasoning is for the lawsuit. You can choose to file as a partnership, a single member LLC, a corporation. We'll talk more details, the difference between an S corporation and C corporation. So this is the simpler version. There's some states that have L3Cs. There's some states that require you to do a PLLC. So you really need to know your state regulations. They're just variations of an LLC, and all of them have slightly different tax ramifications. That's why it's really important to have an accountant and a lawyer on your mastermind team for day one, because they're going to help you in your local situation, which business entity and stages you're going to want to do, because you'll figure out that typically you don't stay in one business entity forever. An S corporation is a great option for midwives, birth workers, anyone to transition to after their LLCs start making them income of at least $45,000 a year, because an S corporation starts paying you a combination of earned income and capital gains through dividends. So the big difference is tax savings. If you're earned income, you're going to fit in those traditional tax brackets, 33%, 40%, depending on how much money you make. When it's a S corporation, you have the advantage of significant tax savings. The more money that you make, the more tax savings you're going to have, because you're now paying yourself with a combination of dividends, stock holdings from your company, which is a capital gains tax of 15% at this point, versus everything is earned income. So you're going to have a hybrid between the dividends and earned income with an S corporation. You usually want to wait till you're $45,000 of earned income, because you do have a little bit more accounting fees each year, because you have to separately file your taxes, and it costs a little bit more. So you always got to do that risk benefit. So LLC is a great way to start, and then once you start making a good amount of money from your business, at least $45,000, then talk to your accountant and transition over to an S corporation. The cool part is you can backdate at the end of December. You could backdate for the whole year if you're like, I don't know if I'm going to make enough this year or not to do that. Some of these transitions are really nice for your business. You can still do it backdate for the whole calendar year. So the pros and cons of an S corporation: it's a little more complex than an LLC. You have to have separate tax holdings. The taxation is a little bit different. You have dividends you have to worry about. You have to have different operating agreements and the backdrops for your company and the shareholders. You can buy and sell the stocks. You can have people as multiple investors and multiple business owners within an S corporation because of the shareholdings. With an S corporation, the downside is it's just got a lot more complexity to it, more regulations, more accounting things, more things you've got to comply with and be very familiar with bylaws, boards, shareholder meetings, voting rights of whoever are the members of the S corporation. Versus an LLC, it's just simple. You're the business owner. Typically, you got to do meeting minutes each year. It's a far more simpler process. But when you're making money and you can save an extra $10,000, $15,000 in taxes, to do a little extra paperwork is totally worth it. So a C corporation is an interesting one. I'll still bring it up to you, but it's extremely rare that I see midwives would even consider this option. C corporations tend to be public holdings, large business entities, at least 500 employees. This could be a birth center franchise. This could be a healthcare organization. This is something extremely large scale. Not saying it's impossible for midwives to do, but most midwives are starting practices where they want 3 to 5 midwives. They want a few locations. They're not going across the country. They're not going a large scale international plan. And so a C corporation has double taxation, has more complexity to it. There's a lot more with C corporations, and it doesn't make much sense to use it unless you're going to go really, really high level. So the pros and cons: you still have shareholders similar to the C corporation. You still got tax deductions. The self-employment taxes are a little bit lower with this option versus the LLC and the C corp. You still have the tax options. You can still raise funding. You can take an IPO, which is public offerings in time. It's a more expensive startup option. You need to have, I mean, you'd be talking multi-million-dollar deal needs to occur to even consider doing the C corporation to start up, because it's many times $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for just the filing and all the paperwork to get going. And many midwives, it just doesn't make cost-effective sense to start their practice this way. So as an overall summary, I just want midwives and birth workers to really understand the different business entities. I hear it over and over again that I'm a sole proprietor, but they don't even understand why they chose sole proprietor. It was the simplest, it was the easiest. All they had to do was just open up shop and do it on their continued tax forms. They don't understand they're paying the most in taxes. They're not getting any tax deduction perks that you would get from the other entities. There's no separation of you and the business, especially if you want to sell it in time, you want to create a brand, you are the business. So I always challenge midwives, if you could start as an LLC, no matter where you're at, It's a pretty affordable option for most states. And then when you grow to 40, 45,000, most of them we encourage to switch to an S corporation. That's the strategy for most birth workers, most midwives, because it'll be the simplest, it'll be for the type of businesses we're running, it makes the most sense. There are some midwives that choose to do nonprofits and help with federally qualified health centers, start with great organizations getting going, midwifery schools. That is awesome, but most of the midwives that we work with and consult and support are looking at for-profit business entities, home birth, birth center practices, women's health clinics, niche services, and that LLC transition to an S corporation tends to be the best option to work closely with the accountant. So there's a lot of different great options out there. I just want you to know, have the experts on your team, get a lawyer, get a business consultant, get an accountant from day one, because you're going to save so much money, time, headaches, and mistakes by leveraging the experts around you to figure out which business entity is the best for you short term and long term.